Now, there are certain situations where you might be cutting through multiple objects and multiple layers, but you want just one style, section style that is used for everything, right? And in that case, which is kind of rare case, but sometimes we use that for a presentation or otherwise, we can use we can set the section style by clipping a plane, because a clipping a plane is the common denominator for all objects that it cuts, right? So by default, what you can do is that set all your objects to be sectioned by clipping a plane and set the section style for that clipping a plane. We'll do that right now. So let's say I'm going to select that clipping a plane, which is O1, and I'll set its section style to be, instead of by layer, to be custom. Okay. And I'm just going to do a solid color just to show the point here, and click OK. All right. And let's say I actually want all my, and let's say I want all my objects. So I'll select all the objects, right? Except for the clipping planes. I don't want the clipping planes or that square. And for all these objects, I want their section style. In this case, it says varies, because if you recall, some of them were by layer, some of them by object. I'll say, no, I want all of them to be by clipping a plane. Okay. And as you can see now, this is dictating, this clipping a plane is dictating the section style for every single object. And for some reason, I deselected that. That object is not cut at all to start with. But now I have a unified style to cut through all objects regardless. And those are all set by the clipping plane itself. That is the third, just in case you come into a situation where you want to cut everything for a presentation reason or whatever, you can do it by clipping plane. But it is a more rare situation. This is why we typically don't need to touch the section style part, clipping a plane itself. And another way is to do it by layer, obviously, and then go to the layer of that particular section and set it to something, which could be hatch 145. And that does the same, have the same effect, right? Which is just cut everything by the clipping a plane property or its layer. Remember, you can't have it both ways. Each object has the ability to follow its layer or itself, you know. So you can set the color of an object by a layer or by specific layer color for that particular object, and you cannot have it both by layer from one side and by object from the other. So once we selected all the object and said, okay, follow the clipping plane, then they will follow the clipping plane no matter the direction. So that's kind of, but what you can do is that you turn around and set that other clipping plane to have a different pattern. And instead of to be by layer, actually that other one, so you can have two, but two distinct styles, if you will.
I guess we can do by creating many many planes on the side with other custom hashes and assign each of the objects that we have the same hatch by its clipping plane, such that each object affected only by the clipping planes that have the hatch that I need.
Yeah, that at that point you're really going through a lot of trouble that actually make it, like, for the sake of a presentation, you might as well extract the drawing and apply hatches and different styles to that, because you really, if you're doing it just for a specific, like what we've been able to do here is like each clipping a plane had a different hatch. So this one has its own style, and this one had its own style. So that it's still a uniform kind of. But yes, technically what you said is possible. It's you need to create a lot of clipping planes that are on exactly the same plane, and each one of them to cut a specific certain objects, and each of them has a different kind of pattern, and this way you get that effect. But this is very cumbersome and not extendable, and I wouldn't recommend that kind of workflow, right? In general, objects represent material, for example, and each material has a certain hatch pattern when you cut through them. So the logical kind of way, or let's say 90% of people would want to assign a specific pattern to each object or each layer. And this is the common workflow or use. But if you have very, very niche kind of use and you want to do that kind of thing, oh, by all means, you obviously can do that as well. So up to that point, like what we've done is we actually checked the clipping planes, the clipping sections as a new way to create a clipping planes with lots of properties. We have the ability to save those clipping planes to save named views. We've been able to do selective clipping, which is we clip it through only subset of objects for each clipping plane. And we also learned how to set section styles for objects and layers.